back to the Makers of MidCity podcast. I'm your host, Clark Dunn. And today I have the opportunity to sit down with Mike Gross, Multifamily Asset Manager here at RCP. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit about the topic of multifamily homes and properties here in Huntsville, beyond just RCP's work that they do, but just kind of what the landscape here in Huntsville looks like. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about your background, because you've had a pretty cool journey to get here to Huntsville, kind of a full circle journey. Talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, actually born in Huntsville, which I think these days is pretty few and far between, but moved when I was young, bounced around a bit all over. I was working for a firm up in DC. It was a national firm, and we were doing primarily market and demographic studies for various real estate developers, and Huntsville kept on popping up. And I've got a little bit of family still in the area, and decided it was time to make the transition back, as you mentioned, the full circle moment.
Yeah. And so, I mean, like you said, you were born here in Huntsville. When you were in DC and prior to even thinking about, maybe even moving back to Huntsville, was Huntsville on your radar with the work you were doing? Like, did you know about what was going on here prior to even like the thought of coming back?
Absolutely, yeah. So just aside from my connections to the town, certainly, and I mentioned it was a national firm doing studies for developers all over. Huntsville was increasingly busy over my time there, and it was, I guess, in the real estate world, it became a very hot name, hot market. Yeah.
And so your background is obviously in multifamily multifamily assets, and just kind of everything from apartments to just the landscape of what Huntsville is. And if anyone that's listening, and even probably for yourself, Huntsville's apartments has had a huge boom in the last few years. I think most people in Huntsville, or most people that might be listening to this, might be tired of seeing apartments because they see them all over the place. Do you think, like, as you've obviously stepped into this role with RCP in the last maybe 4 months, but obviously you knew of sort of the history and kind of what the area itself looked like. Talk a little bit about kind of what that the supply and demand of multifamily properties here in Huntsville, and maybe why a few years ago they really had to up the intentionality of having new properties and new apartment complexes here in the area.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of meat on that bone. So tell me if I start to go off the rails here. But Huntsville always has had very strong labor market, along with high incomes. I mean, very hardworking town. We've got Research Park and the Arsenal and all that. So even in the teens, always very strong labor market. Post-pandemic, we started seeing a lot more in-migration. Population growth exploded. If we look at the past 5 years, annual population growth is about double what that previous 5 years is. So 2020, the pandemic hits, all that, people start moving to Huntsville in droves. And that's because there were a lot of job opportunities here. And even still, we have historically low unemployment in Huntsville. It's continued to be the case. Very strong labor market. So we've got people from all over coming here. Prior to 2020, the apartment market is pretty stagnant. You'd see minimal deliveries, but you've got these people moving from all over to Huntsville. That's kind of your demand side. Your supply side, you've got these national developers who started taking note of that. And these folks maybe wouldn't, back in the day, maybe they wouldn't have looked past Nashville, or maybe they would have skipped right over to Florida, looked at some of these bigger markets. These national developers started honing in on Huntsville and saying, hey, there are people from all over moving here. We need to build accordingly. And then another piece of that is actually, it's very interesting. Of all major U.S. MSAs, Huntsville has experienced, since 2020, the highest increase in renter propensity. So what that tells us is we've got all these people moving to Huntsville and they want to rent. And it figures, right? If you've been in Huntsville for 5 minutes prior to moving, you're going to want to rent. You're going to want to kind of feel out the town, get an idea for it and everything. So that is what has caused, over these past several years, that's what's caused this huge boom of supply. You've got all these people moving here, leading all these national developers to build here. And that's where we are today with, as you mentioned, a lot of apartments, a lot of construction. Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible just to see, because I mean, there's areas of town that I would have never thought of as someone that's lived in Huntsville my entire life, went to college here, everything, like haven't left. There's areas of town now that are getting apartments that I couldn't have even fathomed the need or necessity of those apartments in that area. Not necessarily because the area was bad, but because the area was still up and coming, or still just didn't have the entertainment that you would have thought would have attracted people to want to live there. I mean, I think a few years ago, prior to 2020, you had a lot of these nicer apartment complexes that were downtown. You had the Avenue and the Artisan that were both downtown. You had a couple at Providence. But that was kind of your pockets.
Sure.
But beyond that, they're really like connecting with town. Madison wasn't really a thing. MidCity didn't really have the residential and the multifamily properties that it has today. And then you have even areas of South Huntsville near Hayes Farm that are, the amount of apartments and homes out there is insane. Talk a little bit about the landscape of what RCP has with the residential and multifamily properties, because that increase of available apartments currently, as well as future apartments, is huge.
Yeah. So first off, you kind of touched on that east-west growth corridor where you mentioned it previously. A lot of these points, whether it's downtown and then Madison and Providence, previously these points weren't connected. But as Huntsville has continued to really grow west, you've seen developers start to fill in this area with luxury residences for people who kind of want to live in those middle areas. And MidCity is a perfect example of that. So certainly RCP's largest development right now. MidCity has, at completion, will have 4 multifamily properties. Currently, there are 2 delivered, 2 under development right now, scheduled to deliver in 2025.
Wow.
In addition to that, RCP also is developing City Center, which is right across the street from Big Spring Park. If you know the AC Marriott and the Eclipse residences right there, there's currently another multifamily project, Bartley Lofts, under construction just south of the Eclipse. So that covers RCP's current multifamily portfolio. A lot going on.
What does it typically look like as far as the work you're doing on either a daily basis or a monthly basis for the specialty and the area of expertise that you have within RCP? Like, what does your day-to-day look like?
Absolutely. So I'd say the majority of my time, it's a lot of work to lease up one of these apartment buildings. Metronome, where we are now, it's 296 units, and delivering at the same time, as we mentioned, as many other apartment buildings across town. It's a lot of work to get, we call it heads on beds, to get this place fully occupied. So I work really closely with our leasing team to make sure that our resident experience is as high as it can be. And in addition to that, we work with our development team on our new projects. You continue to improve and learn on everything. And so Eclipse and Metronome, great projects, and Anthem House and Wellery and Bartley Lofts, these are projects that are just going to continue to build on that quality. As you see the quality of multifamily living in Huntsville across the market continue to increase, because we're always looking for the latest and greatest.
Yeah. And so, I mean, how tough is it to kind of navigate and look at, the supply of apartments as RCP and properties within MidCity, properties at the Eclipse, and that area, the Bartley Lofts? How do you look at the market standard for maybe Huntsville, and then the level of expertise or the level of comfort you're hoping that these apartment complexes are able to bring to the customers, getting that heads on beds? How do you have to compare that with what's going on in the landscape, or do you kind of sort of what it is you're trying to create, and you know the value of what that is?
Absolutely. So I'll backtrack a little bit. Pre-2020, when we were seeing a lower level of development, the kind of apartments that were being delivered was also different. So it was primarily garden-style products. So think surface level parking, outdoor walk-ups, open-air breezeways, all of that. Since 2020, you've seen more low-rise and mid-rise apartments. So these are typically larger communities with a proper parking garage and everything from elevators to air-conditioned hallways, all those bells and whistles. So we have an additional focus for each of our multifamily properties, because as there is so much competition currently in the Huntsville market, you have to have a kind of quality differentiator in order to make yourself stand apart. Otherwise, someone's just going to shop purely on the rents and say, okay, well, the rent's over here, $50 a month cheaper. I'm going to go there. We want to offer something that people want to seek out and are happy to rent.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little bit of it earlier when as developers prior to 2020 kind of overlooked Huntsville. Now that they're not overlooking Huntsville, and there's a lot of attention on Huntsville with articles that come out, new events happening within MidCity at the Orion, whatever it might be. There's a lot of news within Huntsville. How do you now look outward of seeing what some of these other bigger cities are doing, like Nashville? Like instead of the other effect that you were having where most people weren't looking at Huntsville. Now everyone's looking at Huntsville. We have to look outwards and looking to see maybe new and unique things that other cities like Nashville or Atlanta are doing within the work that you do and kind of bringing that into the Huntsville market.
It is a nice aspect of being an up and coming market is that, yeah, we can look at Nashville, we can look at Austin, and we can see, okay, what's worked well there? How do we I'm happy to steal a good idea if someone else has laid the road for us. So I think one of our primary ideas behind MidCity in general is these are going to be multifamily residences that are in a dynamic, walkable neighborhood. That's something I think we've seen work again and again in cities. I'm just thinking of Nashville. Think about the Gulch. If you're familiar, you've got fantastic retail line in the streets. You've got plenty of residents around. There's a ton of great food and beverage options. We're emulating that here, where Huntsville doesn't have a ton of these kind of dense mixed-use neighborhoods. You get a bit of it downtown, but outside of that, you get a bit of it at Providence, let's say. But outside of that, it's a bit few and far between. So that's the main idea that we're looking to emulate here.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, like it's this area, this idea of a walkable, traversable area that you don't really. We talk about it a lot on the podcast. Where like people are going to get to the point, and we've already seen that, where they can live within MidCity, they can work within MidCity, and they can enjoy entertainment within MidCity, and that's incredible to think about. But that's also what people that are coming to Huntsville are wanting to see. That's what they have, and maybe in their bigger cities, is stuff like this, where like they don't even have a car, like they're used to walking to work, or working remote, or coming down to a space like this that we're recording in, where you can find your own little private office or have a conference call or whatever it might be.
Record a podcast.
Yeah, record a podcast. And then I think what's interesting as someone who is only you've been back in Huntsville for the last 4 months, probably since May or so. What are you most excited about? Maybe not even within maybe the work you're doing, but maybe just within the Huntsville landscape, either within MidCity, within just Huntsville as a grand scheme of things, or what would you like to see too? You
kind of touched on it. Living in DC prior, I did not own a car, and I loved being able to walk to my favorite restaurant. And we're continuing to build in more and more of this walkable cityscape in Huntsville, both at MidCity and also citywide. And I'm very excited about that opportunity to, if I can avoid getting in my car, I will happily, especially this time of year when it's so lovely outside. We've got great weather here. And so it's nice to be able to take advantage of that more.
Yeah. And so as we've discussed a little bit about the prior landscape for multifamily in 2020 and that boom, we talked a little bit about kind of the future, the next, year or so within RCP and some of the developments here at MidCity and kind of what that landscape looks like. Fast forward another 3 years. Like, what do you see a plateau of the demand and supply kind of meeting this moment where it's like, okay, there's enough out there. Let's just let it get filled before we start building more? Or do you continue to see more and more projects over the next 3 to 5 years to kind of support the continued growth that Huntsville is projected to have?
Absolutely. So I mentioned we had this big supply wave kind of starting in 2020, 2021. And I would say that we're about 2/3 of the way through that supply wave. 2021 saw record deliveries. 2022 increased that number by about 30%. 2023 increased that number by about 50%. So we've now got, what is that? 3 years of back-to-back-to-back record high deliveries. 2024, it looks like it's going to just edge above that 2023 number. then things should start to slow down. And the main reasons are we've seen vacancy increase with this huge wave of supply. We've also seen negative rent growth over the past 2 years. So I think we had this big flux of national developers who said, hey, this market is undersupplied. And now I think you're going to see we have begun to see those same developers say, okay, now this market is adequately supplied, or maybe a bit oversupplied. Like you said, we're going to give things a little bit of time to let population growth continue to catch up, which very strong population growth, that's continued to be the case, but it is going to need some time to catch up. And it looks like we are going to get that over the next few years.
Okay, yeah. And I think I recently saw an article that came out maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. That was a list of the top 10 cities that were, and you probably know exactly what it is that I'm trying to reference, but top 10 cities that are going to have the highest growth in apartments or multifamily properties in the next couple years. And Huntsville was ranked 10, I believe, on that thing, which is incredible. Like, I think when I saw it, I was like, I thought we had enough apartments, but like, there's also like, I think it's interesting when we have conversations like this, or just conversations in passing with people that you probably see out. Like you mentioned at the very, very beginning, finding someone that was born here in Huntsville or has grown up in Huntsville their entire life is far and few between.
Yeah.
And I think that those conversations that you have even within MidCity, within downtown, wherever it might be, I mean, you're seeing that there's so many people that are coming here because there's so much opportunity here. And so it's crazy as someone who's grown up here my entire life to think that Huntsville's continuing to add this many more people and many more apartments. And there's this many people wanting to come here, but it's also like, because we're a pretty cool city. Like, this is a pretty fun place to live. And so it's incredible just to see that growth. But I appreciate you taking the last little bit talking about sort of your background and your journey to get here to Huntsville with RCP, and then just your expertise in multifamily. I think I've learned a lot about kind of what this landscape looks like. I'm excited for what the next few years looks like within MidCity at RCP, within Huntsville in general. But I thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.